Picture, if you will, three jackasses sitting at their computers talking about an old show from the 60s. Because they have nothing better to do, they will discuss its history and some of their favorite episodes. This is not Earth anymore. This is the CouchBlab TV podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CouchBlab TV podcast, our first one ever. And today we're going to be talking with probably one of the greatest shows of all time, The Twilight Zone. I'm your host, Ben Nelson, and I'm here with my two co-hosts.
I am Hope.
I'm Tiffany.
And today we're going to take a look at some of the most famous episodes from this series, kind of generally talk about the show in itself, and actually go over some of our particular favorite episodes from this iconic television show. So basically, what Twilight Zone was an old show that started in the late 50s and went on through the 60s, that was started by a man named Rod Serling. He's basically the narrator of the show and kind of the guy who introduces each episode at the beginning.
Yes, God.
Yep, he's basically the best character. I mean, everyone probably can recognize him just from him showing up in his voice.
He kind of just shows up in the background for each episode and it's just like, hey, here's what's gonna happen.
Yeah, I kind of wish sometimes that the character in the episode would just turn around and be like, who are you?
He kind of just stands there in the background. He starts narrating all the information, putting things down, and then, introduces you to the Twilight Zone. And then the episode proceeds.
Yeah, so what is the Twilight Zone? Well, it's a show that's basically a horror / sci-fi kind of mystery show. Basically, it's like an episode usually would refer to subject matter in the weird, macabre fashion. It would tell a weird story with some unusual, imaginative twist usually to it, whether it be something that relates to war or politics or just general stuff that was happening during the actual time of this show, and kind of put it in a fantasy setting, which is nothing new. I mean, usually most of all sci-fi follows this formula. So, but this is a really great example of it being very successful in doing that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. In fact, Rod Serling was generally known to be kind of one of those major people out in Hollywood and television that was trying to pose a philosophical and social question with each one of these episodes, especially considering that most of his topics deal with subjects such as, like the Cold War, McCarthyism, racism, sexism, and different areas of society that he felt like he wanted to take time to explain.
Yeah. Fantasy or not, basically, there's plenty of episodes through this entire show that anyone can enjoy no matter what they are. There's ones that go weird out off the walls bananas with characters and aliens that show up at points, or sometimes it's some of the most simpler stuff, or it's heartwarming even, a lot of them, which we'll get into. So basically, let's start off just going by over some general episodes of the series. Basically, these are episodes that essentially anyone and their grandma probably have at least seen once or even parodied a bunch of times throughout pop culture history. But let's start off with probably the biggest one that actually won awards, believe it or not. Eye of the Beholder is probably considered the quintessential episode for the series. It's basically a woman who has her face bandaged in a hospital, and she's having surgery because throughout the entire episode, she basically says that, her disfigurement will leave people looking at her weird. And they never show anybody's face in this episode, and you probably know where this is going, right? Essentially, at the end, we find out she unmoves the bandages, and she looks like a normal girl in the entire thing, but they say that the surgery failed. So what's going on? Twist time, people. They're all pig-faced people.
Yeah, it basically poses the question of, what is beauty in the eye of the beholder? The people that are doing the surgery essentially are, traditionally grotesque, but in their world it's beauty is essentially, as we know it, grotesque. And so by about the end of the episode, spoilers for a 50-year-old TV show, another man approaches him and promises to take her to another land, and basically states that beauty is in the eye of the beholder where they're going. And so it kind of poses the question of body image, social image, what exactly is beauty, and how can we define that.
So that's basically it for that episode, but let's get on to the next one, To Serve Man. Now, To Serve Man is the other a big name one, mostly because another alien type shows up in this episode, and essentially everyone probably knows it from that, which is the actor who played Lurch from the Addams Family, dressed with a big forehead, and is basically your quintessential tall alien that can speak to people through psychic powers. Him and his entire race apparently come to Earth with agreement to basically give everybody in the entire world shields so they can protect their own country, and they basically cease all war on the planet. And
they even fix world hunger at one point.
Whoa, of course. Why would you want starving humans for what the twist is?
Yeah, I mean, basically, him and his mild yard stare, as he basically talks to people telepathically, promise, the society that, we can fix all problems, end all wars, and to top it all off, they even promise to take them out to their world to visit for basically kind of a tourism board. And so, as he, starts to think more about it, since he works for essentially the CIA, the main male character in the episode, he starts to get kind of curious and think, I feel like something isn't right here. Maybe we should start translating some of the stuff that they're bringing in order to find out the truth.
His female friend, who works in almost like, what would you call that? Like, decoding room or something. Basically, one of the aliens, the Lurch character, left a book laying on the table at the meeting, which you would think if this was their plan, if they were trying to have some secret plan, they wouldn't be so reckless of leaving a book there, but apparently they do. She decodes only the front cover of the book, which is called To Serve Man. So people are like, they just want to be helpful. And so we get to the end where essentially, yep, it's a cookbook.
It's a cookbook.
That's so... Yeah, so basically the guy's being boarded on the ship before he has time to run, and they scream with the woman, his friend, basically yelling, "It's a cookbook!"
Yeah, we basically find out that the humans are being herded for cattle, essentially, to kind of be the next, entree for these alien races.
Well, I mean, by that point, when he's on the ship and, it cycles back to the beginning a little bit, where he's trapped on there, and all he can do is eat and accept what's happened, because by that point the aliens have integrated themselves so much that they really can't do anything to resist. So he just accepts his fate.
Yeah, and I think that for both To Serve Man and Eye of the Beholder, the different horror elements and kind of the subtlety that goes on for most of it until the big twist plays off really, really well. It's actually Twilight Zone is one of their biggest strengths, where they kind of like to build up slowly to it and then kind of hit you with the wall halfway through it.
I mean, there's a big element in the horror genre where you can't fight the enemy you're facing, and in this scene, we know that the scenario is not real, but we can see that the characters in To Serve Man and Eye of the Beholder are just utterly helpless to fight what's going on around them, and they just in the end accept the new reality that's poised around them.
Kind of goes over in horror and as well as in life that sometimes you can't really avoid what's happening to you. You kind of just have to be aware that it exists and see if there's, hope for tomorrow.
Yeah. So let's get on to the next episode, which is Time Enough at Last. Now, this one is definitely someone people have always heard about, because first of all, it stars Burgess Meredith as this little glasses-wearing short guy who basically has an obsession to reading, where apparently this entire town gets mad at him for reading everywhere he goes and being distracted, whether it's at his job or his house, which I understand what they were trying to do with that plot, but some people can probably take this as a bit silly nowadays, because obviously it's supposed to be for something if this episode was made today, it would obviously be about somebody on their iPhone or somebody.
You damn kids always texting.
Yeah, or on their Game Boy or something anywhere, and it would probably make more sense, but they didn't have the technology obviously at the time, so books is all we got as a portable device of entertainment. So
I think that...
Oh, yeah, just go.
So I think that essentially, with Time Enough at Last, remember the first time that I watched it, the big thing with him essentially reading books is kind of his main hobby. One of the drawaways I had from it was that, nowadays, we look at somebody reads a lot of books or watches a lot of television, essentially someone that's a nerd or a geek. So I figured it was just them trying to criticize, him being, having obsessive interests like a lot of people do. But, I mean, if you put into the perspective of there is a scene where, like, he's sitting down and he's, like, reading while he's supposed to be working and they criticize him for it, it leans more towards taking an addiction too far rather than just simply criticizing someone for their interests.
Yeah. But then we get basically to the twist of that one where it's like he goes into this lock safe at his job or whatever, and he gets locked inside of it by accident, but it basically shelters him from what essentially happens is a bomb goes off and the whole world is basically gone. It's the apocalypse as we know it, and he finally gets out and basically finds that there's nothing left, no other humans around at all, and he basically even admits that he's like, well, he has nothing really to do. Like, he has plenty of food that managed to survive in tin cans. Let's figure that one out from the amount of radiation alone, and plenty of like other stuff to survive off of. But he's like, well, what's he gonna do? And then he finds out that a library survived and all these books are around, so he's like, yes, now I have all the time in the world to read everything he wants. And when he finally gets all of his collection done to begin reading, sitting on the steps, what happens? He leans down and his glasses that he was wearing the whole time falls off and breaks, and then he can't read because he can't see. Like,
it's not fair.
It's
just
not fair.
Not fair.
Oh,
I mean, like, there's not, like, an eyeglasses shop anywhere, like, where he was. Like, this is an easily remedied thing, but, like, it's still, for him, really devastating.
Yeah.
We never know how bad his eyesight was. That's the thing.
Yeah, it's because usually when you go and get, like, eyesight checked and you go and get your glasses done, he probably had them custom or something in order for him to be able to read, especially, given the character and the size of those glasses. I'd imagine it's like something atrocious. So essentially, yeah, it'd be really difficult to replace those.
Yeah.
I mean, I imagine he's pretty blind without them, but that always struck me as, like, a really big oversight. Like, because, once you're there, like, there's nothing to stop you from going and grabbing stuff off the shelf, in order to help you along. And again, you do have all the time in the world to do that.
Well, again, I think he basically had problems. Like, it was to a degree where he probably couldn't see that well, because if you actually pay attention to the scene when he breaks glasses and he tries reaching down for them, it takes him a few seconds to actually grab his glasses because he's basically fumbling around for it, like Velma from Scooby-Doo style.
Oh yeah, he's blind as a bat, basically.
Yeah, so basically that's how that episode ends, and it's pretty sad, but again, it's one that everyone knows about.
Yeah, like, I've seen it parodied a lot. I think Futurama did it really nicely.
Yeah, the Futurama one is probably the best.
Yeah, like, where it's like, I think when they were doing that, they were just like, it's not too bad, he could have done all this other stuff, and they actually made it worse for that iteration of the character.
Yeah, so
his eyes
but
falling out.
Let's go to the next episode, which is one that actually scared Tiff the first time she saw it, which was Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, starring the great William Shatner in this episode.
Oh yeah, it was one of his earliest roles, if I'm correct.
Yeah,
is that why it scared you?
No, it's not because it's no.
He's just so young.
Oh god.
Oh god.
This isn't right.
But what essentially happens is this guy goes on an airplane flight and he's a little nervous flying through the whole thing. But what essentially is he starts seeing something on the wing of the ship, and he's a silhouette of something ripping at the wing, and he starts getting nervous about it. But every time he tries to notify people that it's happening, he looks back and there's nothing there.
Yeah.
So,
well, Ben, he's not just nervous about it. Like, he's literally returning from, like, a sanitarium, like, a mental hospital, and this is his first plane ride.
Well, yeah.
So the fact, like, it only builds up that he's, like, you know, crazy against him. Like, that's the main thing here.
Yeah,
Well,
so,
yeah,
like,
that's
people don't
that's
really
the
be too leaning in to believe him.
That's the obvious parallel. Do we think he's actually seeing this stuff, or is he just crazy? So
A bit of a catch-22 for him there.
yeah,
And
but
then
we get
basically this gremlin that's on the wing is essentially starting to tear this thing apart, and he's starting to debate basically, if no one will help him, how can he take care of the situation?
And let's actually talk about this little gremlin that he sees. That's what he refers to it as. When we first get a good look at this thing, what it looks to me like is a big-lipped Monchhichi, if you've ever seen those toys from the 80s.
It looks
which
like
are
a
these...
flattened version for the face of, like, the pigs from Eye of the Beholder. That's probably what it was, in my opinion.
I mean, it looks, yeah, a lot like a stereotypical, like, airplane gremlin, from what I could see.
Yes, you're familiar with airplane gremlins enough to say what they look like.
Could you
What
imagine...
the fuck? Cartoons, you know? Jeez, dude.
Could you imagine if this was what the movie Gremlins had in them instead of the little actual gremlins from the movie Gremlins running around? It was a bunch of these things.
The actual gremlins. Okay, alright, fine.
As opposed to...
Yeah.
As opposed to, like Chuck Jones gremlins from Looney Tunes or anything like that.
Whatever. But anyways, at the end, he basically goes crazy to the point where he actually releases the safety hatch on the door, and also is half of his body holding out of the airplane, which gravity alone should have sucked him out and a bunch of other people along with that. Luckily, they managed to survive the crash of the plane. Ironically, basically with him taking away from it with an emergency ambulance, and it shows the wreckage of the plane, and the last thing we see is three giant claw marks on one of the wings.
I mean, he didn't have claws. Whatever.
Yeah,
he did say, yeah, he saved all those people, but he doomed himself. That's
yeah.
for sure.
He did it for the good of humanity, I would like to say.
Yeah.
I also to not die, I imagine.
Yeah. But that part where he actually got flung halfway out of the airplane is what scared Tiff, apparently.
Yeah, because I am familiar with in media, usually when you open up a door to a plane, logic kind of kicks in, and then the door to the plane opens, and it's basically like a wind turbine. You get sucked out of it, and that's what I thought immediately was going to happen. Because I actually have, a big fear of, something happening while I'm on a plane, and I just basically get sucked out of the side of it. So that's just, a personal thing of mine. So seeing it, I was just like, oh, no, oh, God, this is
Yeah,
happen,
but it's, but it's the 60s. They wouldn't have had the budget for that.
I mean, most of the time, this show didn't have the budget to do most of the things they wanted to do, so
yeah.
I guess that's, good on my part, because I was like, I'm not ready to see this.
And then William Shatner went on to be Captain Kirk, and still saw a gremlin outside of the Starship Enterprise.
Ha ha ha.
Okay, but let's get on to the next episode, The Mask. Now, this is a 5th season episode, but basically what it is an old dying man, invites his whole family to his rich mansion because, of course, he's an old man in a TV show, he has to have money. And basically, all of his family doesn't even really like the guy. In fact, they kind of just want him to be gone as soon as possible just so they can get his money. But for one last night, he basically says, you have to, if you want my money, you have to abide by certain rules, and that is to wear these masks for the rest of the night, which are these things that look like a mix. One, he's wearing a skull, obviously to symbolize death, and the others are wearing these weird, ugly, again, pig-like masks. Rod Serling had an obsession with pig faces, now that I think about it. But,
it's a reflection of humanity, that's why.
Exactly.
Our greed.
Yeah. But what essentially happens is, throughout the night, they're basically... he's getting on to every single one of them for how terrible they are as human beings, and by the end of the episode, when he finally dies, all of the people take off their mask, and they find out that the masks have made their actual faces look like the masks.
Yeah, and it's basically each mask kind of symbolizes the individual personality of the person that wears them, and kind of their own individual vices and flaws. But he basically starts out as saying, oh, this is the opposite of what you are, because you're playing pretend. And then basically before he dies, he was basically like, no, fuck you, actually, and then he dies.
Yeah. So the next episode is Nick of Time. And Nick of Time, people will probably know this episode for one little device in particular, which is this little diner fortune-telling machine that only costs, like, I think a penny or a nickel or something. And it's like this little tiny metal tin looking device with a little bobblehead of a devil's head on top of it winking at you. And what it is this couple goes into this diner and basically just has fun with the machine for once while they're getting food. And it gives them a fortune, but then they start getting fortunes of bad things and not having to be able to trust each other from their fortunes when they start realizing some of these fortunes are coming true, ironically.
Oh no, it's the evil fortune cookie episode.
Yes.
Done a billion times now.
Well, it wasn't as done, so frequently back in the 50s.
This is probably what started it now that I know this episode exists. This is what I have to blame for all those episodes.
You mean contribute?
No.
Okay. But essentially, they start panicking and start losing all of their stuff, and they literally start losing their money when they actually start giving their money away to this little device just to know what will happen next in their life, to the point where they go crazy, and that's essentially the end of the episode. Until we see a new couple walk in to actually use the device, and basically it's just going to show that the whole thing is going to keep going on a loop for different people.
Yeah, so it's basically like you can't really try to predict the future, otherwise you're just going to get stuck in the same place continually. You should just try to take each moment as it comes and just, enjoy life.
Yeah. Okay.
Pause it.
Oh.
What? Oh, okay.
Okay, so our next episode is Living Doll, and basically this is probably the precursor to a lot of living doll horror movies like Chucky and stuff like that. But this is actually quite simple, because all it is sequentially this little doll that this girl gets from her mother, and it's very nice. It just talks. It can talk, which is probably a really expensive doll for back in the day. Actually, I think they've mentioned it at some point. But basically we get introduced to her dad, which is kind of this mean, cruel guy. I don't think it's actually her dad. I believe it's her stepdad.
Borderline abusive, actually.
Yeah, it's her stepdad, I believe.
He's basically a huge dick, essentially.
Yeah, because he even admits that when he married the wife, that he didn't even know really about the girl until it was married, which I don't know how you don't realize that off the bat, but whatever.
You're walking down the aisle. Oh, who's that little girl? Actually, that's my daughter. Wait, what?
What? But anyways, he doesn't like the doll. But at first, it's just, he thinks it's a waste of money. But then he starts actually getting more frustrated with it when it actually starts threatening him. At first, this Talking Tina doll, all it is, it's just saying obvious stuff like, I love you, I'm your friend, Heidi.
Shut up. I'm your friend till the end.
We toys see everything.
Yeah, totally not creepy or anything.
But basically, it starts to wreak havoc on this guy's life as it starts to become more and more threatening. It starts saying things like, I don't like you very much, or I'm going to kill you. And, he starts getting more and more freaked out. He tries to figure out, how do I kill this doll? How do I get rid of this thing? Each time he tries to dispose of it, it basically comes back for more.
Yeah, he tries to he first just tries to throw it in the trash, but then it gets back into the daughter's, bedroom, just sleeping with her. And then he tries to actually put it up against, what's the thing you, that workshop device that's on, everything that you hold stuffing in place with?
I know what you're talking about, but I don't
What?
know the name.
Yeah, you put something in it, you tighten the thing. Anyways, he tries to remove the thing's head, and it actually breaks his buzzsaw tool that he tries, or a saw that he tries to saw it to death in half with, and it doesn't work. It actually breaks it. And so essentially he goes obsessive to the point where he's like, forget it. The doll's won. Just let it be friends with his daughter. It doesn't matter. And anyways, after the next day, he hears something at night in his bed, and he goes to go check it. And when he goes down the stairs, he trips over something, falls to the ground, and breaks his neck and dies. And what was that thing he tripped on? Talking Tina.
Definitely one of the simpler episodes, more to the point.
Yeah, basically don't fuck with Tina is the moral of the episode.
Yeah, it's besides, there's always episodes from this series talking about living objects. I mean, the dummy and stuff like that, or the one where a guy's afraid of machines and stuff like that. But
kind of tapping into essentially, the horror of like something around you being alive that isn't. And kind of how do we deal with the scenario of trying to treat that? Like, is it human? Do we treat it at the same level of being human? There's quite a number of episodes in the series that discuss that element.
Yeah, there's basically something for everybody in this series. If you're not a fan of aliens, don't worry. There's plenty of episodes that also give other moral dilemmas.
Yeah, and a lot of them are very human, too. It's not just simply always just going to be like a horror element. A lot of them are very human, and a lot of them are very basically holding up a candle to political subjects.
Yeah, so essentially we could go on for general basic episodes, but let's actually get in specifically more with some of our favorite episodes, and I think we'll each give our favorite top 5, and if there's some that we've already discussed, we'll just go to the next one. But let's start with my first 5. At number 5, I have The Night of the Meek, and this was the series' Christmas episode. And my God, is it one of the best Christmas episodes of just anything? I think people should watch this on every December, along with other Christmas stuff, because it is so heartwarming, especially just for a Twilight Zone episode. Guys.
Pause it. In my personal opinion, my favorite of the 5 is...
Yeah, Night of the Meek was also, that was my number 5 as well. I quite enjoyed that episode.
It's a really charming episode. Anyone should watch it. For my number 4, I picked A Game of Pool, which is also another one where it's a simple concept in, like, only one area of, like, this only takes place in one room in the entire episode, which is a pool hall. And basically a guy challenges a dead champion pool player to be the best, essentially, and he basically trained his whole life to have the chance to beat him. And when he finally gets the game, throughout it, the ghost is trying to tell him, wouldn't you rather go out and enjoy life? But this guy is so obsessed at being the best that he finally realizes at the end that, to get the best, it's not all it's cracked up to be, because he dies from overexhaustion, and then after beating him, and then becomes the new best and has to accept every challenge of anyone who wants to beat the next best.
Yeah, and like basically every single time that somebody challenges him, he's basically like, now I have to just keep doing this until the end of time, because it's comparing yourself to others and essentially glossing over, it's not so much always about being the absolute best at something, but rather just enjoying the skills in which you have gained and just enjoying it for the ability or the sport alone.
Yeah, I think they actually had an alternate ending to that where he did lose, and he was just like, had you had lost, you would wander the plains forever, challenging everyone who wanted to challenge you. But,
yeah.
Same lesson learned, I think.
Yeah, but my number 3 is another heartwarming one. You're actually going to notice this a lot on my list, that I actually picked some of the more heartwarming ones, because I actually think those are some of the best episodes just in terms of story-wise. My number 3 is Kick the Can, and this is a very charming episode. Essentially what it is this old man that lives at this retirement home likes watching the little kids play kick the can out in this front yard. This was back in the day before you kids had your video games.
Your damn cell phones always texting.
Yeah, where kids played outside. But anyway...
They still play outside. Can you guys stop being old for a second?
Yeah, but anyways... he starts having fond memories of when he was a little kid, playing with his friends. His friend is also an old man who lives at this retirement home, and basically his friend is basically like, our time is over, just go to bed, just realize how old you are. And this guy, he has reasonings to want this sort of young life again, because there's the early part in the episode where his son looks as if it looks like he's going to pick him up and actually like bring him back to home from this retirement home so he doesn't have to live there anymore, just to find out that his son just came by to say he can't see him anymore because he's moved on. And it's very sad, but essentially what happens throughout it, he starts getting all the old people to start doing games out in the yard again, beyond the owner of the establishment's orders to keep them on a curfew. So what they do is, by the end of the episode, they turn to little kids, all except his best friend, who was still following the rules and stuff like that, and he then feels sad that he didn't get to go with them when they turn back into kids and run into the forest. In fact, his friend doesn't even recognize, the original guy doesn't even recognize him anymore when he becomes a kid, and the friend's still an old man. It's a really heartwarming but also sad episode, and I really like it. But
well, you're only as old as you feel, like that's the moral, and it's like I think it was really nicely executed in this episode. Like we feel bad for him at the same time, because like not only did he miss the chance to be young again, but now he's old and he doesn't have anyone to complain to or even sit with. He's abandoned by everybody.
Yeah. Okay, well, my number 2 is another interesting episode, 5 Characters in Search of an Exit. And this is actually the first episode I introduced you to the series, Tiff, with.
Oh, yeah, I quite liked it, actually, kind of the mystery behind it. It's a really good way to get into the series. The good thing about the Twilight Zone is you don't really have to watch these in linear order because it's episodic based. So if you really want a good place to start off, I think that this is a really good place to get a feel for what the TV show is like.
Yeah, essentially it's another one of those, it's a simple concept with a great enough twist that leaves you like thinking constantly. And it's essentially this guy falls into this hole, and it's literally just a circular room, and essentially he's a general who doesn't even know what his name was or who he is or what happened in his life at all. And essentially he's met by these 4 other characters, a clown, a ballerina, a bagpiper, and a hobo. And they all have the same problem. They don't know who they are, and they don't know what to do and where they are and how they got there. They're basically all just blank slates, which leads to and then the whole episode they try to escape from this hole in the ground, and when they find a way to finally get out of the hole, with the sergeant actually falling outside of the whole area, we finally find out that it has one of the most interesting twists that you would never even have probably saw coming in a degree. And I'm not going to spoil it because I genuinely think people should watch this with open eyes for the first time, because the twist hits you.
Yeah, and I think that it kind of caters to it, but it still has a certain element of kind of, the heartwarming aspect that comes into a lot of the episodes in this series, where it kind of makes you sit down and think about kind of the human element behind the characters. And even though it takes place within this mystery horror realm, it still kind of brings back that human element of who we really are and kind of their place in society. So I do think that it kind of has a bit of the best of all the different aspects of the show.
Yeah. And now for my number 1, which is definitely my top favorite. I will always enjoy watching this, and I will always tear up when watching this episode because it gets to me every time. What are you about, Hope?
Just here we go.
Oh, God.
Oh, man.
Gonna cry? Essentially, my number 1 is Walking Distance, and to a lot of people, this is actually, who've actually seen this show, is actually one of their top episodes as well, because this generally is probably one of the most heartwarming things is someone will ever watch from the show. It's nothing really that out of the blue. It's nothing really alien or scary. In fact, it's just a mere guy who basically drives down a road from a meeting that he's like a guy who works in the city, and essentially he goes to this old place that down the road is where he used to live, and he starts realizing that when he walks down there, everything starts seeming familiar, but in a weird past way. Like he's in an ice cream shop, and the ice cream was only 10 cents as opposed to like $1 or something to their equivalent back in the day. and people he thought were dead or old enough to be dead are still alive, and he starts realizing that he's gone back to his old neighborhood from when he was in the time of when he was a child. And to the point where he starts enjoying it because it's simple and easygoing, and he actually finds out that his littler young self from the past is still living there because he's flown back in time. And he tries to recreate and talk to his old young self just to get that feeling of like genuineness again. But in the plot of getting to there, he screws up because what he essentially does is chase this kid down, and this kid's probably afraid of the biggest stranger danger ever, to the point where it ends up him chasing him to a carousel where the kid trips on the carousel and it hurts his leg, to the point where he leaves his older stuff with a stiff bum leg at the end. And at the end, essentially the father of the kid, and his dad technically, when he's at his age that he would have been when he was a kid, actually comes up to him and talks to him about him and finds out that that it's his son from the future, and basically gives him a lecture on, let this kid have his summer. You've had this summer. And it's one of the heartwarmingest scenes from the whole show, and I still enjoy it to this day.
Yeah, and I think that, you have all the reason for thinking that it's very sentimental and it, reaches to you personally because of kind of this general human element. Especially, I think it resonates even better today that a lot of us want to go back to when we were kids and have, those early memories that we had. But as people get older, they have to kind of let those go and basically make new memories for themselves. And I think that that's something that still holds up today.
I mean, yeah, like, what would anyone really trade for just one more day? I can see why you like that episode. You might want to consider putting that, like, in a paper someday for how much you've talked about it. Tiff, do you wanna do yours next?
Yeah, I'll go right ahead.
All right.
I'll keep mine pretty short, but a lot of the ones that I really like are usually ones that deal with kind of either the human aspect, or I like a lot of the ones that deal with kind of the more political sides of things, because I think that's one of Rod Serling's biggest strong suits, was using the horror element to kind of gloss over a lot of, the turbulent 60s and what was going on during his time period, because a lot of this stuff can still be taken today, as well as just the general twists are really interesting. So for number 5, I have Pitch for the Angels, and in Pitch for the Angels, a quick summary is about this man who essentially is a salesman on the street, not doing too well, but he absolutely loves the kids, and he's an actually really decent person. He finds out one day that this kind of government agent comes to him and reveals that he's basically none other than Death himself.
Yeah, which actually wouldn't be the first time that this series would go with that story of the Death talking to its victim.
Exactly. So basically, Death comes and he was just like, hey, today's your last day, pack up your stuff, let's go. And he was just like, wait, I don't want to go just yet. Like, I haven't done all the things I want to. I still have these kids to look after. And he was just like, you don't really get a say in this matter. After trying to evade him, basically, he decided, okay, well, since I can't take you, little girl, you're basically coming with me. So then he freaks out and he's just like, oh, now I have to right my wrongs. And basically the episode ends that his thing that he's never got to do is a pitch for the Angels as a business seller, and manages to sell everything that he has in his briefcase in order to stall time so that he doesn't go and take the girl when she's scheduled to leave.
Yeah,
making him miss the trip.
Yeah, when it's referring to Pitch for the Angels, it's a business pitch. It's not a Angels in the Outfield type situation.
God, I wish.
I mean, that could have been equally as interesting, I think.
But basically, I think that it has a really good story element to it. And then he was revealed at the end that he's basically going to heaven. So it's kind of like, a good moralistic story with also the kind of the story of you can't quite escape death, but you can kind of go out in honor. So I think that's a good lesson to take away. Number 4, the episode that I think resonated really well was I Sing the Body Electric. And I Sing the Body Electric is basically kind of these 4 girls. Was it 3 or 4?
I think it was 3 kids. One of them was a boy.
Yeah, it was these 3 kids, basically. And they don't really have a mother figure in the household, so they decide to actually go out and buy a model prototype of the ultimate mother. And so they go to this store that essentially sells all these different models called I Sing the Body Electric. And so they managed to find the perfect model, this very nice, motherly nanny woman, essentially, that's actually an android. And so one of the girls obviously doesn't trust her, and she's just like, no, like, you'll never, like, be the full replacement of my mother. You'll never, take care of me as well as she did, until eventually she manages to save her in a car accident. So, basically, the other girls learn to love her. They basically learn that, it doesn't matter whether she's real or she's fake. That's somebody that's looking out for you, that is willing to take care of you, and that's, the most important thing of all. So, I think that, once again, it's another more human episode from the Twilight Zone that kind of still has the eeriness to it, because it's something so, out there and science fiction-y, but it still brings back kind of, the moralistic lessons that it tries to uphold. For number 3, I have I Am the Night, Color Me Black, and this is one of the more political episodes. Basically, this man is on trial for hanging, and basically a part of his hanging was due to a crime that happened in the city that he's guilty for, but part of the reason why they're hanging him is because of his race. He's African American. And so, to kind of sum her up quick, by the end of the episode, he's finally held on sentence for hanging, while this basically pitch blackness is going over the whole city and everyone's bewildered. It's like, this has never happened before. What's going on? We're not really sure. And so, they're warning them like, hey, maybe we should address this problem, and people aren't really going over it because of the thing with the trial. And then finally, once the man is finally hanged, it starts to get darker, and you hear on the newscast that other parts of the world are getting darker in places full of hatred, such as Birmingham, Shanghai, different types of places where major trials during the 60s were going on, and a lot of people disagreed with them.
It's pretty, yeah, they wouldn't be the only episode that actually dwelled into racial tensions, but this episode in particular probably was the most famous one for doing so. It's specifically actually bringing up the race matter without actually it being a cover, like with using the cover up for, like, say, aliens or other type of robots or something as the replacement for an actual race of human being. This was the first one to literally say, yeah, this is talking about the relations between whites and blacks at the time.
And it's basically trying to kind of hold a candle to it respectfully, while also trying to make its point very clear, which I appreciate.
Yeah.
For number 2, I have A Stop at Willoughby.
Next stop, Willoughby.
Willoughby, yeah, basically, A Stop at Willoughby is essentially about this man who's getting tired of his life, and, he's always just, ordered around to push down the line.
Oh, yeah.
And basically try to fight to, be the best businessman, be the best at this, like, you have to contribute. Like, he just wants to take things slower and enjoy life and, let the days pass by, but the kind of world that he lives in doesn't allow him to do that. And every night when he goes home on the train and falls asleep, he notices that he ends up at this stop called Willoughby, which is one of those, like, basically really, like, slow, like, southern 1950s towns. Think something out of, like, the Andy Griffith Show. And
yeah.
So he keeps debating as to whether or not he should get off at the stop or not. And spoilers, once again, for a 50-year-old TV show, or 50 plus, basically, when he finally decides to get off at the stop at Willoughby, he's revealed that he basically committed suicide.
Yeah.
And the actual funeral home is Willoughby.
It's pretty funny, but I'm actually curious. I wonder if this guy and the guy from Walking Distance ever met each other, because they seemed they would get along pretty well.
Yeah, so I think that, it's moralistic, but it does it in a much darker tone. Because a lot of ones we've mentioned have been, like, sweet and heartwarming in the end. No, this takes, like, the complete and opposite turn and tries to be like, hey, sometimes, this isn't always the best idea.
Yes, the Twilight Zone. Anything goes.
Yeah, basically. Mm-hmm. And then finally, the last one that's my favorite is The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. This is probably one of the most famous episodes that the Twilight Zone has released. It was nominated for multiple awards. The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street is basically holding a candle up to McCarthyism, which is a really hot subject at the time, and basically uses kind of the element of aliens in the space race to kind of bring in those, points about McCarthyism and kind of the controversial nature of it. And so essentially, one day, this, lovely 1950s style town,
Can we pause?
Sure. And I would say that for my number one favorite, my all-time favorite episode from this series would be The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. It's one of the best-known episodes from the series. Basically, it's covering over the subject of McCarthyism that was going on during the 60s when the show was airing. And so The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street brings up this, old 1950s, 60s style suburban, neighborhood. And one day all the power goes out, there's nothing running, car engines aren't working, nobody really has a solution for what's going on in the neighborhood. And so one of the boys in the town basically suspects that it might be an alien, and at first they're like, oh, that's crazy. But then, they start noticing smaller trends, and they start, thinking, what if this is something that's beyond our control? And, people that are like, oh, I'm going to go out of town and see if I can find help. They're like, well, what are you actually planning? Who are you going with? Where are you going? What have you been up to? And so basically they start to kind of inspect each other and try to investigate what's going on, and they start pointing fingers at this is your fault, and basically they all start panicking by the end of the episode, and they start running around the town and start assuming that everyone's a culprit. And from the distance you can kind of see these two aliens watching over each other that are just like, oh, don't worry, we don't even have to do anything, they'll just take care of each other, and we'll go on to the next town and the next town, and this will continue to happen. So it's kind of holding up a candle to if you don't deal with the problems of McCarthyism, if you're not trying to solve the situation, this is what's going to happen to you.
Yeah. It's it's, again, probably one of the most obvious in terms of political talk for an episode of this series. So let's get into Hope's number 5, which she actually has a lot of ones we've already talked about, so this should go pretty quick.
Oh yeah, boy, you guys really hammered everything else home there pretty much. But yeah, Night of the Meek, Eye of the Beholder, those two I really liked because of the character performances. The despair in that woman's voice beneath her bandages, it was enough for me to stay invested for the whole while. Kick the Can also was just, I really liked it because it was a nice kick in the shin for, the protagonist, the protagonist's friend, rather, that, you missed out on your chance, just because you wanted to cling so desperately to the idea that, you're old and things are over for you. Good lesson learned there. Monsters Aren't Due on Maple Street. I actually, my teacher read that to me when I was in middle school.
Oh, very cool.
And being in 5th grade, I think it was a comic or something that she read it to me from. It was pretty profound. I was just oh man, really shouldn't hate each other, because I was just starting to form an opinion on what sort of a hate could do that, back then. But seeing that given to me at a really young age helped hammer that home for me. And my number 1, if I had to pick one, would have to be Perchance to Dream. Episode where the guy goes to the doctor and he says, "Doctor, help me, I'm so anxious, if I fall asleep I just might die." And it's the whole episode describing things like the visions he's seeing of a woman who's there but he's not sure of who she is. And I'm not going to spoil the end and reveal everything about this episode right off the bat, but definitely it's one of the ones that caught my attention.
Yeah, it's one of those, it almost seems like it's going in one direction through the whole thing until...
Well, do you wanna spoil it then? Because I don't know.
No, I'm not gonna spoil it. Again,
all right.
We're trying to promote this as best we can because essentially there's a lot of episodes that really need to be watched with a blind eye the first time for it to really hit you hard.
Yeah,
I agree.
Really solid contenders in this series for what's the best, what's the worst, there's a lot of just general gems in here, and it's been lampshaded so much in, pop culture to the point where even if you're not familiar with watching the episode, you've seen the elements from it before in other series.
Yeah. Essentially, no matter what, this series will probably stay relevant for quite a while. I mean, there's shows like this that have developed over time through the inspiration of the Twilight Zone. I mean, we're talking about Tales of the Crypt, even stuff like modern stuff like Black Mirror. They wouldn't probably even be on TV if it weren't for Twilight Zone getting its way onto television from the very beginning. I mean, Yeah, this
paving the way for future surreal horror series.
This series, its 2 revivals it had, especially its 80s one, which maybe will be a later episode for a later time, and also it had a movie as well that we might discuss on the horror podcast maybe one day in the future. But again, if you're ever like wanting to just sit down for some short bit enjoyable stuff that's just weird and out there but can really also tell you something in the process, you need to sit down and just watch this. And luckily enough, you can get a lot of this stuff very conveniently nowadays. If you have Netflix, you can watch every season except for season 4, which were the hour-long episodes. I don't know why they don't have it on Netflix. It's probably a licensing rights thing, I'm not sure. But
a lot of people also usually don't have a very good opinion of season 4, so that's probably why they're trying to keep them out of the radar.
True, but there are still a couple of good ones from season 4 that are actually pretty great. But again, that's available on Netflix. If you go on to CBS's website, I'm pretty sure you can watch all of them on their site, because I've actually seen it advertised like that. I don't know if you have to sign up for something, or they're just on there. But if you actually want to buy these, you can get an entire Blu-ray set on Amazon of this show, or at your probably local Best Buy or somewhere, very easily. And aside from that, I think we basically got it covered. Thank you guys for watching this show. It's been a pleasure talking about this. It's one of my favorite shows of all time, and it's a good way to start off this TV podcast.
Yeah, it's a real gem to be able to talk about this more in detail and kind of recognize it for what it's done and some of the best episodes that have come out of this series.
Yeah, it's really stood the test of time, in that it's gotten 3 remakes down the line, each that has its varying degree of success. But I enjoyed the early episodes.
Yeah. But anyways, if you guys are hearing of any of the episodes we covered on this show and thought, well, maybe not, don't even just sum it down to the episodes we talked about. There are so many we didn't have time to cover that we wish we could have. I mean, there's a bunch. Just look up Will the Real Martian Please Stand Up, It's a Good Life, The Obsolete Man, The Dummy, Number 12 Looks Like You, 22, 2. He likes the number 2 a lot.
Yep. But I think for today, that about wraps it up.
Yeah, again, it's something that everyone needs to see a few episodes of, just because it's so enjoyable. So anyways, I think that covers it. So I thank you guys for having this podcast with me today.
Be sure to check out our Patreon as well as our YouTube channel and our SoundCloud for more information. Links in the description below.
Yeah.
All
right. Well, see you guys, and we'll continue on tomorrow with our general movie podcast where we talk about Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Ooh, that should be fun.
Woo-hoo.
Yes. All right. Well, I guess this is our goodbyes from
yes,
you.
Yes, it is. We're leaving.
Yes. All right. See you guys, and have fun in the Twilight Zone.
Right.
Bye.
Do 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 do.